So I'm Mike Saunders. I'm CEO of Commonplace. Commonplace is a community engagement platform based on the internet. And I set up Commonplace because I saw a need for better tools to allow the community to have a more constructive say in how the area that they live is changing. And also for organizations who are conducting change to get better data on the community, on their needs, on their aspirations. So what drives somebody like me, I'm an entrepreneur, is fixing a problem, okay? And I think there's a huge problem in the lack of or the lower levels of engagement that communities have with big projects that are going on around them. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we can all change that together using the collaborative potential of the internet. So over the last decade or so, over the last 10 years, I think there's been a tectonic shift in the way that digital engagement tools are used. Whether that be to communicate messages, whether that be to debate issues, whether that be to collaborate in various different ways or make change happen. And let's face it hasn't all been positive. And I guess the historians will be best placed to work out whether it's been a net benefit or not. But the reality is that digital communication is here to stay. And more than that, it's actually a fundamental building block of our economy, of society. Whether you look at politics, whether you look at entertainment, whether you look at retail, digital tools are widespread and are fundamental tools for all of those different organizations. And increasingly that's happening with community engagement. So there's fantastic opportunities and fantastic examples of how this has been used. So, I mean, if you look at, for example, the way that the Labour Party has used digital tools to engage supporters, mainly of a younger demographic, and if you look at the way that other things that have happened, other events, have changed the way that communities are expecting their voices to be heard. The fallout from the Grenfell disaster, for example, has really raised the bar in what communities think that they need in how their voice is being heard. So digital technology is here to stay. It can solve problems in really, really interesting, exciting ways. So my question is, why isn't it used more in community engagement around built environment projects? Or at best, it's used sporadically. And I think there are three reasons that I wanted to just talk through. Three perceptions about digital technology. And I think those are perceptions of risk, perceptions of cost, and perceptions of need. So let me just talk about those really briefly. I think often there's a perception that by using open digital technology to talk about your plans, to talk about community needs, you're creating an unmanageable risk, politically and operationally. But what we've actually found at Commonplace is the opposite is true. If you're open and you use some of the open opportunities that technology provides, you can build trust with the community, you can work with them throughout a project in a way that's really, really very difficult to do otherwise. And what's more, by not using this kind of technology, you can create much bigger problems. So you can perceive to be opaque and trying to hide things from people, which in most cases you're not. You can also risk the digital conversation happening elsewhere. So it might be happening on Twitter, it might be happening on Facebook. If you're not actually actively engaged with that conversation, it can really run away from you. And you can be perceived as not having as representative, as large data understanding of what a community needs. Let's talk about cost. So I think it's quite often perceived that digital tools can be quite costly. But if you look at the cost per response digitally, it's very, very low compared to the cost per response from other forms of engagement, maybe setting up an event, for example. Our data shows that it costs a few pounds per response to engage somebody digitally. It costs typically 10 times that, maybe tens or even hundreds of pounds. And not only that, 10 to 100 pounds to engage through events or other forms, but not only that, digital tools allow you to engage throughout the whole project. It's not just a one-off snapshot opportunity. You can tell people what's happening right at the beginning. You can get an understanding of what they need. You can tell them what you've heard, how you're going to respond to it. You can tell them about events, all using this digital channel that you've set up. And thirdly, perception of need. I think quite often digital tools are perceived as something which is a nice to have. But if you think about any other kind of campaign that would be set up, let's say a product launch, an education program, a political campaign, would any of those things consider not using digital technology as part of their tool set? Of course they wouldn't. The only way of getting across your messages, of reaching the breadth of people that you want to reach, is by having digital as an absolutely core part of your strategy. And that's not to say that in community engagement you should ever use digital on its own. Talking to people face-to-face is always going to be the richest and the most valuable way of collecting information, but you can only do that with a certain number of people. Digital can help you fill in the gaps, both in terms of demographics, in terms of sheer numbers, and can give you this really, really rich data source. So if you're not using digital and using it well, I think what you're really saying is that you don't actually need to get to this large group of people. You don't actually feel that you need to get any kind of representative sample of what the community needs. Conversely, there's a massive opportunity that digital presents, and in a nutshell, I think it's about co-opting the public to be partners in change rather than barriers to it. And that's really where all the benefit of digital can flow from. And I think if you can do three things, then you're able to really reap these kind of benefits. So the first thing is choosing your technology. There's lots and lots of different technologies out there, and whilst things like Twitter and Facebook are great for getting footfall, they're great for finding lots of people, they're really not great places to have structured conversations. And there are other tools which have been designed specifically for this kind of community engagement, like Commonplace. The secondly is use the opportunities to have an open discussion. That means present all your plans openly, but it means also, before you present your plans, actually use technology to understand who the community is, what they want, what their needs are, maybe what some of their perceived fears are, because then you can deal with those. Once they're out in the open, you can deal with those. Technology can be fantastic at doing that. And the third is to engage early and consistently. Technology can be great at doing this, as I explained earlier. You can use it not only as a way of gathering information, but you can use it as a way of playing back to a community what they, as a whole group, have said, as well as responding to people individually. So I just wanted to talk briefly about 3 projects we've done, which are, I guess, little mini case studies of what you can do if you do it well. So the first is Mini Holland with the London Borough of Waltham Forest. This is a cycling regeneration project which used Commonplace. The second is in Leeds with Leeds City Council and our partners WSP, all about public transport. And the third is with Bristol City Council and Travel West, which is about using technology to help prioritise where a budget is going to be spent. So Waltham Forest Mini Holland is a borough-wide programme taking place over 3 years, and it consists of about 20 different local neighbourhood schemes which are all joined together in this programme. So one of the things that Waltham Forest needed was the ability to conduct in parallel a large number of these neighbourhood engagements to be able to understand not only what's happening in an individual neighbourhood, but to be able to pull together across the whole programme what's working, what wasn't working, to enable them to rethink some of the things as they went through the consultation. So Commonplace provides the ability to do these very focused neighbourhood, intensive, local engagements and consultations, but also to pull together a whole programme and understand the broad patterns of what is happening. So the way that we did it was we used our heat map tool, which you see on the left here. What this allows you to do is to get people to talk about the place that they live, to put comments on a map, to say how they feel, to tag those comments with what the reasons are behind why they feel like that, and then to pull a huge amount of data out of that, and to use that to inform some infographics, which could be played back to the community saying, you know, of the residents versus the businesses in the area, this is what the residents felt was most important as a group, this is what the businesses felt was most important. Feed all of that into a design process and into how the plans for change were being developed, and use the technology as an opportunity to do that iteratively. So they had 2 or 3 different stages of the plans being presented to the community. What were the outcomes? Well, we managed to reach about 100,000 people and about 17,000 respondents. So a really significant chunk of the borough. it was actually quite a controversial scheme. So there was lots of things like road closures that were happening in the area. And if you Google Mini Holland Waltham Forest, you'll find lots of pictures of residents complaining. But actually, the data that they collected showed that overall, the residents across the borough were very supportive of the scheme. And there was at a midpoint in the scheme, a judicial review of the whole thing. Having the evidence that they'd collected on Commonplace was a really important part of being able to explain how they'd been through and collected robust representative data, and to be able to defend that challenge successfully. So the second scheme is with Leeds and WSP. Now this is a public transport program, and what the team needed to be able to do was not only get lots of information across about the various different routes that they were proposing, but also to get across the vision of how the routes were not only going to improve going from A to B, but also improve some of the public spaces. So one of the other things that we have is a very visual way of explaining some of the changes. So what you see here is a before and after view, where on the left-hand side you see a photograph of what a particular view in a particular space looks like, and on the right-hand side, a CGI of what the proposals are. And you can move this white bar here from left to right, so you can see how the public space is going to change. Sitting behind all of the public views from Commonplace, there's a set of analytics tools, which we call a dashboard. And what that provides is a real-time summary of what people are saying. So who's saying it, when they've said it, what their responses are, what the reasons behind their responses are. And this enabled the team to make decisions, week on week as they were going through this scheme in terms of how they communicated, how they tweaked the design, and so on. So again, the outputs in Leeds, very good reach, very good response, some very, very constructive responses from the community. And I think this is one of the real benefits that you can get if you do it right, is rather than having people just complaining, you can actually reach out, you can construct a relationship with people, and you can get a constructive view of how they actually think change should happen. And that helped them to make these decisions quickly, to make them iteratively as they were going through the project. And the steering group running the project has had a really fantastic response to the way that the Commonplace has been used on the project. So the third example was in Bristol, and this is a slightly different project. So this was Bristol City Council with a particular budget, and they were looking to decide across the whole city which areas of pedestrian cycling infrastructure should be prioritised for this budget spend. And they had all sorts of data feeding into that, but one of the areas that they had missing was what do the public who are using this infrastructure actually think? What do they think the priorities are? And so they used our heat map, which is what you see here and I mentioned earlier, and asked the public to put comments on a map saying where in the city they thought the priorities for upgrades to the cycling and walking infrastructure were. And again, this is another different view of our dashboard. So what you see here is some of the topics that people talked about and which ones of those bubbled to the surface. So things like the layout, the type of cycle path, and the traffic were some of the things that people talked about most. And this information was coming through as people were making comments, and you can see how it changes as you go through the engagement. So one of the particularly interesting outcomes for this project was that when they asked people to make the comments on the map, they were able to say what they thought should happen. So whether they thought it should be fixed, whether they thought it should be replaced, or whether they thought it should be rebuilt. And what they had anticipated was that most people would say that the particular junctions they thought needed to be completely redeveloped to solve the problems. But actually what they found was that many, many more people said they thought they could be fixed, and actually gave very simple ideas about how they could be fixed to make them much better. So they were able to make their budget go a lot further than they were previously budgeting. So one of the interesting things for us is that Commonplace is used for transport, it's used for infrastructure, it's used for housing, it's used for public realm schemes, so a whole kind of panoply of built environment projects. But we have ended up kind of specializing in transport infrastructure, active transport a lot. And two of our big customers are Highways England, obviously very important here today, and high speed too, using commonplace in very, very different ways, but at scale as well as very, very locally. And one of the things that we have, so we've run about 250 projects, we've got reached almost 500,000 people in total. And so one of the things that we can do, as well as running projects for individual customers, is we can start to draw out themes and trends of what people are talking about. And one of the fascinating things to me is that people really, really, really want to talk about streets and transport. They want to talk about the environment when they're moving around. They want to talk about safety. They want to talk about the kind of public realm that's associated with transport and infrastructure. Those things come top of our trend list. So people really, really do want to talk about this stuff. And I think if you can provide better tools to be able to do it, then there's a really, really massive opportunity out there. So just to summarize, the internet, digital technology is a wonderful thing. I think it's an underused thing in community engagement around built environments and highways. It doesn't have to be a scary thing to use. It doesn't have to be a costly thing to use. In fact, it can save you cost. It can save you time. If you don't use it or you don't use it well, you will actually be, I think, creating more risks and causing more problems for yourselves and for your projects longer term. And there are huge benefits from doing it. So you can get people engaged early. You can get more and different types of people engaged. You can get constructive feedback from them. And at the end of the day, you'll end up with a wonderfully robust set of data which can be used to get your schemes approved. And most importantly of all, to bring the communities with you who are going to be using the changes that are happening in the future. Thank you very much. My details are up there as well. I know they're not. They've gone.